Hello and welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week it's Mothering Sunday, and I've been thinking a lot about family this week and how that ties in with what we think about on Mothering Sunday. So that's what we're going to explore this week. And I think I've talked about this before, but I think it's a really important thing for us to think about in rural communities. So when you have rural communities coming together into a church community, there aren't very many people, and the people who come into that church community are bound together really just by that geography, and they might not really have very much in common. So they might not be politically similar, they might not think the same things about what church worship should be like, they might not think the same things about church finances, in fact they might not think the same things about being church at all. But in a rural place where it might be 10-15 minutes drive to the next church for worship, and nearest church community, or even more, and people who live in a rural setting tend to want to worship within their community. So you can have this group of people who are not all that similar at all, and they might not like each other very much either. They might not have stuff in common, and they might not like each other very much. And I have to say that if they were then to commute for some time into an urban setting for church worship, to be part of a church community where there might be more people like them, that is a whole big problem for rural communities as well. So you end up with these people who sometimes are not often in agreement with each other about all sorts of things, and in the end you kind of as a church leader have to be brave enough to say, look, I realise you guys might not like each other very much, and that's okay. And in fact that is very good analogy to the church family, because we all have members of our family which we like more than other members of our family. However, in the church community you might not like somebody, but you have to love them as part of Christ's family. You have to love them even if you don't necessarily like them very much, and that is reassuring but also a huge challenge for people in a rural community. How do we love people that we don't naturally get on with but are part of our church worshipping community together? So that's part of the challenge when we think about what does it mean for us to be Christ's family as the church. Hello, in this week's Thought for the Week we're thinking about Mothering Sunday, and we're thinking about what it means to be family, and we've got two readings set for this week. One is the reading from Exodus at the beginning of chapter 2, where Moses is in the basket, in the rushes and in the river, and what happens there. And the other one is when Jesus is on the cross and he speaks to Mary and to John. And these are two really interesting readings for us to have on Mothering Sundays, because they're not readings about kind of idealised family situations. They are readings which are involving people working out how to create good families in which people can grow or be nurtured as they're older. So the first reading I really love because it has this cast of amazingly strong women in it. So there is Moses, he's the baby. We've got Moses' mum, we've got Moses' sister, we've got Pharaoh's daughter. And what happens in the reading is that both Moses' mum, his sister, and the princess sort out an agreement amongst themselves where Moses is going to be cared for by his mother, and then he is going to be cared for by Pharaoh's daughter, brought up in both of their families in a family which is joined together in a setting where Moses is going to be safe and nurtured and cared for. It is not a typical family. And then we come to think about Jesus' family. So Jesus is both Joseph's son and God's son, and all because Mary said yes, that she was prepared to be Jesus' mum. So again, Mary makes a really brave decision, and it's about 9 months before Christmas, which is why we think about Mothering Sunday at this time. So we are thinking about Mary caring for Jesus. We think about the family in which Jesus grew up. I have a fantastic poem where Joseph is described as the godfather of God. I just think how Jesus was cared for within that family is great, but that is not the reading that we have for today. We have the reading from the time around the crucifixion when Jesus is being crucified, and a lot of the disciples have disappeared, but John, who was kind of Jesus' best friend, is there with the women, including Mary, Jesus' mother. And Jesus from the cross turns to Mary and says, "Here is your son, he is your son, John is your son." And then he says to John, "She's your mum, Mary is now your mum." So even the last thing that Jesus was doing when he was a human was putting together a family to care and nurture each other, to love each other in a setting like that. Now Jesus talks about God's love in so many different ways, but one of the ways that he chooses to talk about God's love is God being like a mother hen, gathering chicks under her wings. So he uses this really maternal image of God's love when he's talking about how we love and care for each other in families. So this is Mothering Sunday, and we might want to spend Mothering Sunday really giving thanks to God for our mothers, for the care that they were able to give to us, to the way that they nurtured us. But it's a real challenge and important for us to think about what it means to be part of God's family and God's bigger family in that. Who did God put in our paths to look after us like a mother would have looked after us? When Jesus is saying to grown up John, here, this is now your mum, and she's going to care for you and you're going to care for her. There would have been many other people in our lives who have cared for us, and there are people for whom we have a duty of care like a family. I went to an event last year where there was a baby being baptised, and we were discussing with someone else in that church family, and they said, "So are you family?" And I just began to try and explain that we weren't actually biological family, although we'd known these people for 25 years, when the mum of the baby said, "Well, yeah, really, kind of, you are our family." And on reflection on that, there have been times when God has called us to offer to care for them, and times where God has called us to accept that they will care for us, and that is how family has worked in that place. So Mothering Sunday, a time to think not only about our own mothers who were bad or good or caring or not caring or probably actually doing the best that they could, and all those who care for us in that way that God wants us to care for each other, the way that he describes his care, that mothering, gathering chicks sort of love that God has for us. This week's Dibley Moment of the Week is something which happened in one of the villages where I used to work quite a while ago, and there was a member of our community in that village who was just an ordinary member of the village as far as I was concerned. I moved in, I hadn't really known much about him. He was very well integrated into the village. He was an older person, and it wasn't for quite some time that somebody said to me, "Do you know, he was actually, he grew up not with his mum and dad, but he'd been left on their doorstep." And I'm like, well, that's curious, isn't it? It had been quite a long time ago. And I thought, well, but that's fine. He grew up with loving parents with a family who really cared for him. He was really well integrated into the village community, and when I moved to the village, he'd been living there for decades, just as part of the village community. It didn't matter in some ways that he'd been found on the doorstep at all. Whilst a few older people remarked on it every now and then, nobody seemed to know, nobody cared about it, because he'd grown up in the family where he'd been, and he was just part of the village community, loved and cared for in that village community. So that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week, and where you can care for each other with God's love.